Why $500,000 is closer than you think. You know that feeling when you're sitting at your desk staring at your bank account and you do that thing, that mental gymnastics thing where you try to figure out how long it would take you to save $100,000. You start running the numbers. You think about your monthly income, your rent, your groceries, the streaming subscriptions you keep forgetting to cancel, the random Thursday takeout that somehow always happens, and the number you land on is just depressing. Like genuinely discouraging in a way that makes you want to close the app and pretend you never looked. And then somewhere in the back of your mind, $500,000 comes up. Maybe you saw it in an article. Maybe someone mentioned it as a retirement benchmark. Maybe you heard it described as the point where money starts working for you, and your brain just kind of laughed it off. $500,000. Right. That's for other people. People who got lucky or inherited something or started a tech company in their garage. Not for someone like you, sitting here trying to remember if you paid this month's credit card bill. Here's the thing though, and I mean this genuinely. That feeling, that automatic dismissal is almost certainly wrong. And I don't mean that in a motivational poster kind of way. I mean it in a very specific mathematical, behavioral, and psychological way that most people never get to see clearly because nobody really sits down and breaks it apart for them. My name is Adam, and I spend probably too much of my time thinking about money. Not just the numbers, but the psychology behind it, the stories people tell themselves about what's possible, and why some people seem to drift toward financial security almost quietly, while others work just as hard and stay stuck in the same place for years. It's something I think about a lot. It comes up in conversations with friends. It shows up in the books I read. And honestly, it's the kind of thing that kept me up at night for a long time before certain ideas started clicking into place for me. What I want to do today is show you something, a few somethings actually, that I think have the genuine potential to shift how you see your own financial trajectory. Not with hype, not with hustle harder energy, but with real perspective. Because here's what I've come to believe. $500,000 isn't some unreachable finish line for the lucky few. For most people living ordinary lives with ordinary incomes, it's closer than it looks. And the distance between you and it is often less about money and more about understanding. Let's get into it. The illusion of the big number. So let's start right here with the number itself, $500,000. When you hear it, what happens in your brain? For most people, it triggers something automatic, this instinctive categorization that files it under rich people things. And that's understandable, honestly. We live in a world where $500,000 can buy an average house in a mid-tier city. It sounds enormous when you're looking at it from the outside. But here's where the illusion starts to crack. We tend to think about large numbers as single events. Like, to have $500,000, you need to somehow produce or receive $500,000 all at once. And that's just not how wealth is actually built. Not for most people. Think about it this way. If you asked someone to walk 500 miles, they'd probably laugh at you. That's an absurd, impossible-sounding challenge. But if you told them they'd be walking to work every day, taking weekend hikes, going on vacations, and that after several years those steps would total 500 miles, that's just life. That's just movement. It doesn't feel the same at all. Wealth works almost exactly like that. The people who end up with $500,000 in their accounts didn't usually find it. They accumulated it gradually, step by step, through mechanisms that compound over time. And here's the thing about compound growth that nobody really explains properly. It doesn't feel like anything while it's happening. You don't feel richer month by month, but the math is doing something extraordinary underneath the surface, whether you feel it or not. Let me give you a real human example. My friend Lewis, solid guy, works a decent job, nothing flashy, started putting away about $600 a month into an index fund when he was 27. Not because he was financially sophisticated. Honestly, he did it because someone told him to, and he kind of just didn't stop. He didn't watch the market obsessively, he didn't pick stocks. He set it up and more or less forgot about it. By the time he was in his mid-40s, he had more money than he'd ever consciously saved. The math had done most of the work for him. That's not a miracle story. That's just time and consistency doing what time and consistency do. The first mental shift you need to make is this: stop seeing $500,000 as a destination you have to sprint to, and start seeing it as a direction you can drift toward. That reframe alone changes everything about how you approach your finances.
The time variable nobody takes seriously. Here's something that genuinely frustrates me about how financial advice gets communicated. Everyone talks about compound interest. Everyone nods along when it gets mentioned, but almost nobody internalizes what it actually means in practice. We understand it intellectually and dismiss it emotionally. And that gap between intellectual understanding and emotional reality is where most people's wealth quietly evaporates. Let me try to make this real for you. Say you invest $300 a month. That's $10 a day, roughly, starting at age 25. You put it into something broad, something boring, that returns an average of 7% annually. That's a modest, historically reasonable assumption. By the time you're 65, that $300 a month has turned into somewhere around $800,000. You personally contributed about $144,000. The other $650,000 came from time, from the math just running in the background of your life. Now, what if you wait until 35 to start? Same $300 a month, same 7% return. By 65, you have about $380,000. Still meaningful, but you lost nearly $420,000 by waiting a decade. Not by spending more, not by making bad investments, just by waiting, by being uncertain, by telling yourself you'd figure it out later. That 10-year gap, that's the cost of "I'll start when things settle down." And things, as you probably know, have a funny habit of never quite settling down. What makes this even more fascinating to me is the psychological reason people delay. It's rarely laziness. It's usually a form of perfectionism. People think they need to understand the market perfectly before they invest. They want to wait until they have more money to invest so it makes more sense to start. They're waiting for the right moment. But the right moment in compound growth isn't some optimal entry point. The right moment was always earlier. The second best moment is right now. The takeaway here isn't complicated. Start earlier than feels logical. Start smaller than feels meaningful. Because the time variable isn't just important, it's actually the most powerful variable in the whole equation. The lifestyle trap nobody warns you about. All right, let's talk about something a little uncomfortable, because I don't want this to just be a math lecture. I want to talk about the behavioral stuff, the human stuff, because honestly, that's where most of the real obstacles live. There's this pattern, you've probably heard it called lifestyle inflation, where as people earn more, they spend more, and their savings rate stays roughly the same or even shrinks. It happens quietly, it happens naturally, and it happens to people who genuinely know better. I'm not pointing fingers here. This is just human psychology doing what it does. Here's a cycle. You get a raise, you feel good, and you should. You earned it. You upgrade a few things, maybe a nicer apartment, a better car, more dinners out. Each individual upgrade feels reasonable, and they are reasonable individually, but collectively they absorb the raise almost entirely. And then next raise, it happens again and again. And before you know it, you're earning twice what you did 5 years ago and saving about the same amount, which means you're no closer to that $500,000 than you were before. The really sneaky part of lifestyle inflation is that it doesn't feel like a mistake while it's happening. It feels like progress. It feels like enjoying your success. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying your success. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there's a version of enjoying your success that doesn't absorb every single dollar of every single raise you ever get. The concept I find genuinely useful here is what some people call the first dollar rule. Basically, the idea that whenever your income increases, the first allocation of that increase should go to your future, not your present. Before the lifestyle upgrades, before the new subscriptions, before anything, some percentage of that new money gets redirected toward wealth building. Even 30% of a raise invested consistently over time creates a dramatically different financial outcome than investing 0% of it. Lewis actually did this, somewhat accidentally, honestly, because he set up his auto investment before he set up much of his lifestyle. By the time he adjusted his spending, the investment was already baked in, and he didn't miss the money. And that's a key detail. You don't miss money you never got used to spending. Our brains adapt to whatever baseline we set, so set the baseline intentionally.
The thing about income that people get wrong. Okay, so I want to spend a moment on income because I think there's a really pervasive myth worth addressing. The myth is that your income determines your wealth, and while income obviously matters, I'm not going to pretend it doesn't, it is significantly less determinative than most people believe. There's a reason you'll find stories of school teachers with million-dollar net worths sitting next to stories of professional athletes who went broke within years of retirement. Income is a tool. What you do with the tool is the actual story. Now, this cuts both ways. I don't want to turn this into some hustle culture sermon about how everyone can get rich if they just budget hard enough, because that's not quite right either. There is a meaningful floor below which saving becomes genuinely very difficult. I acknowledge that. But for a much larger portion of the population than you'd think, people earning middle-income salaries, not six figures, not tech salaries, the gap between their current trajectory and a $500,000 net worth is mostly behavioral, not mathematical. Here's the uncomfortable version of that insight. A household earning $70,000 a year and saving 20% of their income with reasonable investment returns can realistically reach $500,000 in invested assets within about 20 years. That's not comfortable money, $70,000. That's a real budget that requires real discipline, but it's absolutely achievable. The problem is that most households at that income level are saving somewhere between 0 and 5%, not 20. The question isn't really, how do I earn more, although more income is always useful and worth pursuing. The deeper question is, how do I make sure that as I earn more, the trajectory actually changes? Because without addressing that question, more income just means more spending. The wealth gap stays exactly where it is. What wealthy people actually do differently? I want to talk about behavior, not mindset in an airy, vague sense. Actual, observable, replicated behavior patterns that show up across people who build wealth consistently. The first one is almost embarrassingly simple. They automate. They remove the decision of whether to invest from the monthly equation entirely. It's not a choice they make each month. It's a system that runs without their involvement. This matters enormously because financial discipline isn't actually about willpower. It's about reducing the number of decisions you have to make. Every time saving money requires a conscious act of restraint, you're relying on willpower, and willpower is a depletable resource. Automation removes the reliance on willpower entirely. The second behavior is something I'd call comfortable boredom. Wealthy people, real, quietly wealthy people, not flashy social media wealthy people, are mostly doing extremely boring things with their money. Index funds, automatic contributions, not watching the market daily, not trying to time things, not pivoting to the hot new asset class every 18 months, just consistent, boring, automatic accumulation. It's not exciting, it doesn't make for great content, but it works over and over for ordinary people living ordinary lives. The third thing, and this one surprised me when I first really absorbed it, is that they think about money in terms of systems, not events. A windfall isn't a party, it's a decision point with a plan already attached. A raise isn't just more spending money, it's an increase to the systematic allocation. Every financial event feeds into a larger structure. They're not reacting to money, they're directing it. If you take anything actionable from this section, let it be this. Build the system before you need the discipline. Set up the automatic investment now, even if it's $50 a month, even if it feels pointlessly small. Because you're not just building wealth, you're building the infrastructure of a wealth-building life. And infrastructure is almost always worth more than its individual components.
The number you actually need to hit first. Here's something I find genuinely useful to reframe. Instead of focusing on $500,000 as the goal, think about the intermediate milestones that make $500,000 feel inevitable rather than aspirational. The first real milestone is $10,000. Not because $10,000 is a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, but because it represents the beginning of the compounding engine.
It's the point where your money starts generating a meaningful amount of additional money on its own. It's also psychologically significant. It's the first proof of concept. You did it once. The architecture works. The second milestone that matters is getting your savings rate above 15% of take-home income, because at that rate, with average returns, time is genuinely doing most of the heavy lifting. You're no longer swimming against the current. You're being carried. The third milestone is the first time your investment returns in a single year exceed what you manually contributed. For a lot of people, this happens somewhere around the $50,000 to $80,000 mark. And it's genuinely a surreal moment, the moment when the math starts outrunning your manual effort, when you realize that your money is now working harder than you are. That's the moment when $500,000 stops feeling like a fantasy and starts feeling like a destination with a timeline. Think of it in stages. Get to $10,000, then get your rate right. Then let time do the compounding. Then watch the machine start outrunning you. By the time you're at $100,000, $500,000 is no longer a question of if, it's a question of when. The conversation you haven't had yet. There's one more thing I want to address because I think it's genuinely important, and it doesn't get talked about enough in the personal finance world. The conversation about money is often treated as a solo project. You and your spreadsheet and your budget app and your determination. And that's fine as far as it goes, but the people who build wealth most consistently tend to be embedded in environments that normalize wealth building. They talk about money with their partners in honest, non-anxious ways. They have friends who aren't embarrassed to discuss financial goals. They've consumed enough information, books, videos, podcasts, conversations, that they've developed a financial vocabulary and a set of mental models that make wealth feel like a natural outcome rather than a lucky accident. Your environment shapes your financial trajectory more than most people realize, not because your friends make your decisions for you, but because what you're surrounded by defines what you think is normal. If everyone around you treats a $500,000 net worth as some unthinkable luxury, you'll absorb that belief. If you start exposing yourself to stories, frameworks, and communities that treat it as a reasonable, achievable benchmark, the kind of thing that ordinary, non-genius, non-lucky people reach through consistent behavior over time, your internal sense of what's possible starts to shift. And I can tell you from personal experience, once that shift happens, it's hard to go back. Not because you become obsessed with money, but because you start seeing the path. You start connecting the present behavior with the future outcome in a way that feels real and motivating rather than theoretical and depressing.
The quiet confidence of having a plan. Let me bring this back to where we started. You, staring at your bank account, running the numbers, feeling the quiet discouragement of the distance between here and some large abstract number. Here's what I want you to take away from everything we've covered today. The $500,000 number isn't as far as it looks, but the distance isn't covered by luck or by sudden large windfalls. It's covered by understanding what actually drives wealth accumulation. Time, consistency, automation, behavioral patterns, and an environment that normalizes financial progress, and then building those things into your actual life in whatever small way you can start with today. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need a high income. You need a direction, and you need to start moving in that direction before it feels entirely logical to do so. Because honestly, it will never feel perfectly logical. There will always be a reason to wait, a bill to deal with, an uncertain period to get through first. The people who reach financial security are mostly people who started imperfect and got better, not people who waited until everything was right. I think about Lewis sometimes, his $600 a month that he set up almost by accident, the account growing quietly in the background of his life, without drama or obsession. That's what this actually looks like. Not a grind, not a sacrifice, just a direction held consistently over time. $500,000 is not a fantasy. It's a math problem with a long time horizon. And the single most important thing you can do, starting today, is stop treating it like it belongs to someone else. It doesn't. The path is there, and it's a lot shorter than you think.